The crunch of gravel under tires was the only sound breaking the tense silence. A long, gleaming black limousine glided to a halt at the entrance of the opulent country manor, where the wedding was about to commence. Guests, dressed in pastels and sporting forced smiles, turned, curiosity etched onto their faces. Who would arrive with such fanfare? The bride was already inside. The groom, Lucas Svensson, watched from an upstairs window, a smug smirk on his face, anticipating the arrival of the one person he had invited purely out of spite. He expected her to arrive by taxi, perhaps on foot, looking lost and broken. The limousine door opened. An elegant shoe touched the ground, followed by a woman in an emerald green silk dress that seemed to capture the sunlight. It was Ava Shaw. Her dark hair was swept into a sleek, low bun, and her eyes, which he used to call too intense, now looked calm and as deep as the ocean. Lucas's smug smile faltered. She didn't look broken. She looked radiant. But the real shock was yet to come. The chauffeur reached into the car once more and helped a child descend. A little boy in an impeccably tailored suit. Then, a little girl in a matching dress. And then, another girl, identical to the first. Triplets. 3 tiny versions of a future Lucas had never envisioned for her. The murmuring among the guests turned into a buzz of astonishment. Upstairs, Lucas Svensson's face went ashen, the color draining until he looked like a ghost at his own wedding. The humiliation he had so carefully planned had just backfired spectacularly. Where are you watching this story from today? Wherever you are in the world, know that sometimes the quietest plot twists are the most powerful. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more stories like this one, which remind us that true strength often blossoms in the most unexpected places. Their wedding had begun with a promise that, to Eva, felt like safe harbor. Lucas was charming, effusive, and seemed fascinated by her. He loved, he said, the way her mind worked. He called her routines adorable quirks, and her need for quiet, mysterious depth. Eva, who had spent her entire life feeling slightly out of sync with the rest of the world, believed him. She believed she had finally found someone who didn't want to change her, but rather, understand her. The autism diagnosis came late in her life, as an adult, and explained so much. Why crowds drained her, why certain fabric textures felt like they were scratching her skin, why she preferred deep, direct conversations over superficial social banter. Lucas at first seemed to accept it all, but the veneer of charm didn't last. After the wedding, the adorable quirks became annoying behaviors. The mysterious depth turned into coldness and distance. Eva's need for predictability and structure, which helped her navigate a chaotic world, was now labeled by him as stubbornness and inflexibility. He began to use her diagnosis not as a tool for understanding but as a weapon. In arguments, he'd say, "It's your autism talking, you can't see things like a normal person." In public, he treated her like a project, an exotic trinket he was patiently teaching to behave. Ava vividly remembered the sensory pain of the parties he forced her to attend. The sound was a cacophony of loud voices, thumping music and clinking glasses, all blending into an overwhelming wave that left her feeling dizzy and nauseated. The perfumes of people, the heat of bodies too close, the strobing lights that seemed to pierce her eyes. It was torture. She developed the technique of retreating to a corner, focusing on a single point on the wall just to survive. Lucas saw this as a personal insult. "You're embarrassing me, Ava," he'd hiss in her ear as he dragged her home. "Why can't you just relax and have fun like everyone else?" He gaslighted her constantly. When she expressed discomfort with the wool of a sweater he'd given her, he'd say she was ungrateful. When she asked to leave a noisy restaurant, he'd accuse her of ruining the night on purpose. The phrase he used most often was, "You're overreacting." She heard it so much that she started to believe it. She began to doubt her own perceptions, her own feelings. Maybe she was indeed broken. Maybe she was the problem. Their home, which should have been a sanctuary, became a minefield. Lucas would rearrange Eva's things, moving her carefully ordered objects, knowing it would destabilize her. He criticized her in front of friends, disguising insults as jokes. "Oh, Eva and her little rules," he'd say, laughing, as others laughed along, oblivious to the hurt in her eyes. Intimacy became a performance. Another area where she felt she was failing a test for which she'd never received the rules. Divorce was the logical, yet still brutal, conclusion. He conducted the process with calculated cruelty. In front of the lawyer, he listed all the ways she was incapable of being a good wife. He used autism terminology, twisting it to paint her as deficient and unstable. The final jab came on their last day together to sign papers. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt and delivered the words that would echo in her mind for months. "Good luck, Ava. Nobody will want the work that is loving someone like you. You're simply too much." In that moment, Ava felt like a shattered vase, its pieces scattered across the floor. She didn't feel anger, just a deep, icy void. She believed him. She looked at her future and saw nothing but loneliness, an echo of his words resonating in the silence of her newly rented apartment. She was too much. She was too difficult. She was destined to be alone. The humiliation he inflicted wasn't a single act but a slow poison he administered over years. And now, she was convinced it was incurable. In the first few months after the divorce, Ava clung to a false hope that she could fix herself. Lucas's words, "Nobody will want the work that is loving someone like you," became her grim mantra. She decided that if the problem was her, then she needed to change. She dove headfirst into a sea of self-help, devouring books and articles promising to transform her into a more social, flexible, and agreeable person. The world seemed to agree with Lucas. The advice was always the same. Step out of your comfort zone. Just smile more. Fake it till you make it. She tried. Oh, how she tried. She forced herself to attend networking events where the noise and superficial chatter left her exhausted within minutes. She'd stand in the corner, clutching a drink, trying to mimic the body language of others, feeling like an actress in a play she hadn't rehearsed. People found her shy or arrogant, unaware of the Herculean effort she was making just to remain in the room. Every failed interaction was further proof that Lucas was right. She signed up for a dating app. The experiences were a succession of silent disasters. On one date, the man, a banker named James Popescu, took her to a loud rock concert. Ava spent the entire evening with her hands clamped over her ears, on the verge of a sensory meltdown. He called her too sensitive, and never called again. On another, she tried to be honest about her autism with a man named Francesco Freitas. He listened with a curious expression and then said, "Oh, like in Rain Man? Are you good with numbers?" The ignorance was as draining as the prejudice. Social pressure was relentless. Well-meaning relatives like her Aunt Olga Lee offered advice that felt like daggers. "You just need to loosen up, dear. Don't think so much." It was like telling someone without legs to simply walk. She felt increasingly isolated, trapped in a painful paradox. Being herself led to loneliness, but pretending to be someone else led to an exhaustion so profound she could barely get out of bed. This pursuit of normalcy was a trap, a false hope that only pulled her deeper into despair. It was during this period of vulnerability that she met Theo Tanaka. He was quiet, gentle, and seemed unbothered by the fact that she wasn't the life of the party. For a brief period, Ava thought she might have found an exception, but reality intruded overwhelmingly. When she discovered she was pregnant, his reaction was panic, and when the first ultrasound revealed not one, but 3 heartbeats, he simply vanished. There was no discussion, no goodbye, just silence. Ava was alone, pregnant with triplets, and more terrified than ever. The news spread as gossip tends to do. She learned through an old mutual friend, Ali Wozniak, that Lucas had commented on her situation with cruel delight. "Triplets? With Ava? Poor kids," he reportedly said, laughing. The humiliation was now public. She wasn't just the difficult ex-wife, but the unstable woman who got pregnant by a stranger and was now saddled with a responsibility everyone assumed she couldn't handle. The false hope of fixing herself had completely crumbled, leaving her buried under the weight of a future that seemed impossible. Society, her ex-husband, and even her own inner voice all screamed the same thing. She was going to fail. The reality of being a single, autistic mother to triplets was more overwhelming than anything Ava had ever faced. The apartment, once her sanctuary of quiet and order, transformed into an epicenter of sensory chaos. There was the crying, often in unison, a high-pitched sound that seemed to vibrate within her skull. There was the constant smell of milk, diapers, and baby wipes. There was the incessant touching of 3 small bodies needing to be fed, changed, cuddled. For someone whose nervous system already operated on high alert, it was a continuous assault. Days blurred into a haze of exhaustion. Ava barely slept. She moved through the apartment like an automaton, ticking off the necessary tasks to keep 3 human beings alive. But inside, she was disintegrating. Autistic burnout, which she knew all too well, reached an alarming level. The lights seemed brighter, the sounds louder, and her ability to process basic information like making a grocery list evaporated. She felt trapped in her own body, her mind a constant hum of overload. The human conflict wasn't just from within, but from without. The world isn't built for neurodiversity, let alone neurodivergent motherhood. Advice from other parents was useless. Let them cry it out a bit, they'll settle, they'd say. But for Eva, the sound of her children crying was physical pain. You need a routine, they'd advise, without understanding that her routine needed to be 10 times more structured, yet also flexible enough for 3 unpredictable babies. The social gaze was the worst. A trip to the grocery store was an expedition fraught with dread. If one of the babies, Mila, started crying, and then Kenji joined in, and Theo became agitated, Ava felt dozens of eyes on her. She saw impatience, judgment. She saw people whispering, and in her mind she heard Lucas's voice. Incapable, unstable, a disaster. Once an older woman, May Kaczmarek Flores, approached her and said, "You look overwhelmed. Perhaps you should have asked for help before having so many." The woman might have thought she was being helpful, but her words were like salt in an open wound. Lucas somehow seemed to know about her struggles. His mother, Martina Hendricks, would call occasionally, under the pretense of asking about the babies, but her questions were always laced with insinuation. "Are you managing, dear?" Lucas always worried about how easily you get overwhelmed. Each call was a subtle reminder of her supposed failure. He reveled in the image of her alone and struggling. To him, her hardship confirmed the narrative he had created, that he was the normal, the stable one, and she, the problem he had wisely rid himself of. His decision to remarry Isabella Thompson, a woman he described to everyone as simple and uncomplicated, was the coronation of his narrative. And then, the invitation arrived. An expensive card, with embossed gold lettering. It wasn't a gesture of peace, nor an oversight. It was a deliberate act of power. It was an invitation for her to witness his happiness, his success, his normal life. It was a command for her to come and see everything she could never be. He pictured her receiving the invitation amidst the chaos of diapers and crying, an exhausted and defeated woman. He wanted her there as a ghost from his past, a living testament for all the guests of how well he had done for himself. The invitation wasn't a request. It was a sentence. He wanted to humiliate her one last time, publicly, and close the chapter with her in the role of the loser. And for a while, sitting on her living room floor with the invitation in her hand and the sound of her children crying in the background, Ava felt like he had succeeded. The turning point didn't come with a thunderclap, but with a silence. It was in the early hours of the morning, around 3 a.m. All 3 babies were crying at once. Mila had colic, Kenji was hungry, and Theo, likely sensing the distress of the other 2 and his mother. Ava tried everything. She rocked one, fed another, massaged the third's belly, all in a frantic, desperate dance. Nothing worked. The sound filled the small apartment, piercing her exhaustion and turning into pure panic. She sat on the floor, in the middle of the room, with the 3 cribs surrounding her, and finally she stopped. She stopped fighting, stopped trying to follow parenting manuals, stopped trying to be the mother others expected her to be, and in the midst of that chaos she put on her noise-canceling headphones. The sound of crying was muffled, transforming into a distant, manageable hum. For the first time in months, she could hear her own thoughts. With the sensory overload reduced, her mind, which had been short-circuiting, began to clear. She looked at her children not as sources of stress, but as 3 little individuals with distinct needs. Instead of trying to soothe them with what should work, she began to observe. She noticed that Mila calmed with firm pressure, so she swaddled her tightly in a blanket. Kenji wasn't just hungry. He was overstimulated by the bedside lamp, so she dimmed its intensity. Theo responded to the low, steady hum she began to make, a form of self-soothing that had always calmed her. Within 20 minutes, all three were asleep. Ava sat on the floor in the silence and cried, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. In that moment, she understood. The problem wasn't her. The problem was trying to fit into a world that wasn't designed for her. The quiet turning point was this. She stopped fighting her own nature and began to leverage it. This revelation changed everything. She transformed her apartment into a sensory-friendly environment. Smart lights with adjustable hues, soft rugs, rigorous visual organization for everything. She created systems. Each baby had a color. Theo's blankets were blue, Mila's bottles were yellow, Kenji's clothes were green. This reduced the cognitive load of having to make thousands of tiny decisions every day. Her mind, which excelled at creating patterns and systems, was finally being used as a strength, not fought as a weakness. In search of support, she found an online forum for neurodivergent parents. For the first time, she wasn't alone. There were others who understood what it was like to have a sensory overload from a baby's crying, who understood the need for predictable routines. On this forum, she met Gabriel Wagner Russo. He wasn't a parent but a business consultant who was researching inclusive workplaces. He was fascinated not by Eva's struggles but by her solutions. He saw the genius in her organizational systems, in her ability to optimize processes under extreme pressure. "What you've created for your children," he wrote to her one day, "is what the world's biggest companies are trying to implement. Efficiency, clarity, and human-centered design. You're not just surviving, Eva. You're innovating." Those words were like water to a parched plant. Gabriel proposed they start working together. Her, with her practical knowledge and analytical mind, and him, with his connections in the corporate world. The idea was to create a consultancy to help companies become more inclusive for neurodivergent employees, optimizing their spaces and workflows. At first, Eva hesitated. Lucas's voice still echoed, telling her she was incapable. But then she looked at her three children sleeping peacefully in the environment she had designed and thought, if I can do this, I can do anything. The turning point wasn't just about finding a new career. It was about redefining what she considered her flaws and recognizing them as her greatest strengths. The path to rebuilding was paved with small victories, each one a brick in the foundation of her new life. The first major achievement was getting all three babies to sleep through the night in the same week. For any parent of multiples, this would be a miracle. For Ava, it was proof that her systems, her fine-tuning to her children's sensory needs, were working. She wasn't just keeping them alive, she was helping them thrive. The business with Gabriel Wagner Russo started slowly. They worked on video calls late at night after the babies were asleep. The first presentation they gave to a potential client was terrifying for Eva. The thought of speaking to executives paralyzed her, but Gabriel had a brilliant idea. "Don't present," he said. "Just show them your system. The color-coded calendar, the timelines, the pantry organization. Show them the logic." And that's what she did. She shared her screen and explained the color system she used to manage Theo, Mila, and Kenji's needs. The Yaowan executives were silent for a moment, and then the CEO said, "This is brilliant. We could use this logic in our project management." They landed the contract. It was the first time Eva made money not despite her autism, but because of it. With the income that started coming in, she was able to hire help. Not just any help. She interviewed dozens of nannies before finding Charlotte Weber, a calm, soft-spoken woman who didn't see Eva's routines as odd, but as intelligent. Charlotte learned the color system, respected the need for quiet, and never ever told Eva she was overreacting. Having Charlotte at home a few hours a day gave Eva the breathing room she needed to rest, work, and simply be. The sweetest victories, however, were the personal ones, the ones that happened in the quiet of her apartment. There was the day Theo, who was more reserved, looked directly into her eyes, smiled, and said, "Mama." The sound of that single word filled every crack in her heart. There was the afternoon Mila, sensing her mother was a bit overwhelmed, crawled over to her and gently placed her little hand on her face, mimicking a gesture Eva often made to soothe her. And there was the night Kenji, who was having trouble sleeping, only calmed down when Ava held him close and started humming softly, the same melody she used for her own self-regulation. He snuggled into her and fell asleep, and Ava realized that what calmed her also calmed him. There was a connection between them, a wordless language the rest of the world didn't need to understand. When Lucas's wedding invitation arrived, the Eva of a year ago would have crumbled. But the Eva of now was different. She held it in her hand and felt no pain of humiliation. Instead, she felt a cold, clear distance. The invitation was no longer about her. It was about him, about his need to prove something to himself. That night, after putting the children to bed, she called her lawyer, Sofia Stefanou, to finalize the purchase of her new apartment, a larger place with a room for each of her children. It was another small victory, but one that felt immense. She decided she would go to the wedding, not for revenge, not to prove anything to him, but as an act of closure for herself. She would show up as the woman she had become, not the woman he had tried to destroy, and she would bring with her the living proof of her resilience and happiness, her 3 children. The preparation for Lucas's wedding wasn't about transforming into someone else, but about celebrating the person she had finally allowed herself to be. Ava didn't spend hours in a salon seeking external approval. Instead, she spent hours researching fabrics. She found an emerald green silk dress, her favorite color, that was soft to the touch and had no irritating seams or tags that could scratch her skin. The dress's elegance came from its simple cut and the way it moved with her, not from uncomfortable embellishments. It was armor, but armor made of comfort and self-knowledge. She also planned the logistics of attending the wedding with the precision of a general. For many, renting a limousine would be an act of ostentation. For Eva, it was an accessibility tool. It was a controlled, dark, quiet environment, a safe cocoon that would protect her and her children from the sensory overload of arriving at a busy social event. She packed a bag, not with extra makeup, but with the children's favorite snacks, small quiet toys, and a tablet with headphones for each of them. She was creating a bubble of predictability and calm in the middle of enemy territory. In the days leading up to the event, Eva found herself reflecting on Lucas. The anger that once consumed her had dissipated, replaced by an almost clinical understanding. His cruelty didn't stem from strength, but from a profound weakness. He needed her to be small so he could feel big. He needed her to be the problem so he wouldn't have to look at his own inadequacies. His marriage to Isabella Thompson, the uncomplicated woman, wasn't an act of love, but an act of cowardice. He didn't want a partner. He wanted an accessory that wouldn't challenge him. Ava considered the irony of it all. The very traits Lucas had mocked for years were now the pillars of her success. Her obsessive attention to detail made her a brilliant consultant. Her need for structure made her an incredibly organized and attentive mother. Her sensitivity to her environment allowed her to create spaces where not only her children, but also her clients' employees could thrive. Lucas had looked at the same set of traits and seen deficiencies. Gabriel Wagner Rousseau and his clients looked and saw talents. She finally understood that her validity wasn't determined by the gaze of others but by her own perspective. The decision to bring the triplets wasn't impulsive. It was a conscious choice. They weren't props for her revenge. They were the embodiment of her new life. They were proof that Lucas's words, "Nobody will want the work that is loving someone like you," were a lie. She had built a family not with a partner, but on her own. She had created love and stability out of chaos. Bringing them was a way of honoring that. It was a way of saying, without a single word, "This is who I am now. A mother, a businesswoman, a whole woman, and I don't need your approval to exist." On the wedding day, as she looked in the mirror, with Mila, Kenji, and Theo dressed and ready around her, she didn't see the broken woman Lucas had left behind. She saw a woman who had walked through fire and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but forged into something stronger. She wasn't going into battle. She was going to her graduation ceremony, the moment she would finally break free from his shadow forever. The peace she felt was deep and unwavering. The arrival was exactly as she had planned, a moment of visual impact that silenced the gossip before it could even begin. Eva stepped out of the limousine, the epitome of grace and calm. She helped her children, Theo, Mila, and Kenji, down from the car, each of them a small emblem of a rich and unexpected life. Lucas's reaction, visible from the window, was merely confirmation of what she already knew. His power over her had completely faded. She walked across the lawn, not with arrogance, but with a serene dignity. She found her assigned table, tucked away in a corner, clearly positioned so she would be isolated. Instead of feeling marginalized, Eva appreciated the location. It was quieter and less crowded. She settled the children, brought out the small toys from her bag, and within minutes, they were quiet and entertained. She didn't try to socialize or blend in. She created her own oasis of calm in the midst of the party. During the reception, after the vows were exchanged and the forced smiles were captured on film, Lucas finally approached. His face, which should have been alight with happiness, was contorted into a mask of anger and confusion. His new wife, Isabella, stood beside him looking nervous. "What are you doing here, Ava?" he hissed, low enough that only she could hear. "What is this scene? The limo, the kids. Did you come here to ruin my wedding?" Eva looked up from a drawing Mila was showing her. She looked at Lucas, the man who had occupied her thoughts for so long, and felt almost nothing, just a sort of distant pity. "Lucas," she said, her voice calm and steady. "You invited me. I came." She paused and then added with disarming sincerity, "Your bride is beautiful. I wish you both all the happiness in the world." Her sincerity threw him off balance more than any shouting or accusation could have. He had expected a fight, tears, a confrontation. He wasn't prepared for her peace. He glanced at her children, who were watching him with curious, innocent eyes, and for a brief moment, perhaps he saw a glimpse of the life he had thrown away, of the woman he never bothered to understand. He stammered, unsure of what to say, and eventually backed away, dragging Isabella with him. Ava didn't stay for the cake cutting. She didn't need to. Her mission was accomplished. She gathered her children, who were starting to get sleepy, handed an elegantly wrapped gift to one of the organizers, and left as discreetly as she had arrived. No one tried to stop her. The image of her, an elegant, self-possessed woman with her 3 beautiful children, was already etched into the minds of all the guests. Lucas's narrative of the unstable and broken ex-wife had been quietly dismantled. Back in the quiet sanctuary of the limousine, Eva watched the country manor disappear into the distance. Her children slept around her, their breath soft and rhythmic. She rested her head against the cool glass of the window and felt a wave of emotion, not of vengeful triumph, but of a deep, liberating peace. The scars of what Lucas had done to her were still there, and perhaps always would be. The pain doesn't magically disappear, but she was no longer defined by that pain. She had built tools, found her strength, and created a life so full of love and purpose that her ex-husband's opinion had become mere irrelevant noise in the background. The hope in her heart was real, not because the future would be perfect, but because she knew, with unwavering certainty, that she had everything she needed to face it on her own terms. The true victory, in the end, isn't about making those who hurt us pay for their cruelty. It's about building a life so full, so authentic, and so happy that the space they once occupied in our minds simply ceases to exist. Eva's story isn't about revenge, it's about resilience. It's a reminder that our greatest strength often lies in those parts of ourselves that the world tries to convince us to hide. Her happiness wasn't a gift, it was a construction, built with the very stones that were once thrown at her. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you think or feel, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes a story is exactly what someone needs to hear to remember their own strength. Someone somewhere might need to hear this today.